Michael, your take on what we're seeing at the moment?
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts this week, Gareth, in what is happening. So the 28-point plan that was leaked by the Russians last week that created this flurry is now a 19-point plan that is more focused on Ukrainian issues. So that plan is now in the ether. It's been very carefully guarded. There aren't many drafts circulating because the last one was leaked and this one mustn't leak because there's some very sensitive things in it. So there's some principles in it, but the plan itself is being held under wraps, quite rightly. Then there is a coalition of the willing meeting today. There are talks between Russia and the United States in Abu Dhabi, and there's a lot going on in Kiev at the moment. Meanwhile, the war goes on, attacks on either side, and we'll see where we are by tonight. But this, as a diplomatic flurry, is all designed to actually, get to a point towards the weekend after Thanksgiving, early next week, where President Zelenskyy and President Trump can get together and maybe come through with a plan which could meet Ukraine's requirements and then see if they can sell it to the Russians. Will they? No, they won't. The Russians will actually, this is Russian tactics. They hold out absolutely for 100% all the time. And they hold out to the very end of the process and they give something at the 59th minute of the 11th hour and then they claim they've given the world. This is what they do. So my guess is that this time next week we'll still be going round in circles and we'll be no nearer a conference which President Trump wants. Might be wrong about that, but I think that's where we are. And that's not a great outcome, but it's not the worst outcome, because this time last week, the worst outcome was that the Ukrainians would be given this 28-point plan. It's a surrender plan, slapped on the table, sign it, or we withdraw all military support. And that was where they were last week.
That was going to be my next question. Where are we at with military support at the moment? Because it feels as though that's gone slightly quiet.
It has. The Americans are giving targeting support and intelligence support to Ukraine, which is really important. They've still got Starlink. Remember, Starlink's a civilian thing. That's Elon Musk. But if Elon Musk turned that off, they'd be in serious trouble. They wouldn't be completely defenceless, but it'd be much harder. So that sort of background support is important. And then the other thing is that the United States is allowing NATO to buy weapons to give to Ukraine. Again, Caroline Levitt, she said that we can't. She said we are selling weapons to Ukraine. We can't go on doing that forever. Well, why not? You've been selling weapons forever to South Korea and to Israel. I mean, you like selling weapons to your allies. What's wrong with anyway? There you are. But the United States is selling weapons to NATO to give to Ukraine. They can keep on doing that. But if they decided not to, if they decided to make Ukraine defenceless, so the Russians would basically win and the Ukrainians would have to give in, then the US has the power to do that. I don't think they'll go down that road, but it's technically possible.
The US also, it has to be said, has the power to give a lot more, doesn't it? You think of the Type 1 Abrams tanks. They gave 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. They have somewhere in the region 4,500 in active use, ready to go. They've got about half that again in reserves, waiting, to kind of be put back into. The US has huge capacity, and I feel as though sometimes that isn't necessarily always made as apparent as perhaps is the reality.
Oh, there's some inconvenient facts in all of this, Gareth. I mean, the US aid to Ukraine, President Trump always said it was 350 billion, and it wasn't. It was about 120 billion at the most, And he always said 350 billion, that's the figure that he conjured out of the air, and he says it all the time. Not true. The other thing is that the amount of aid that the US gave to Ukraine was equivalent at most to 5% of its defence budget. And if it continued to give that 5% of its defence budget to Ukraine, Ukrainians would have actually pushed the Russians back by now. And Russia strategically would be much less of a problem to everybody than it is being. And my point to Americans, but a lot of Americans don't take this, they say, you want to give up on helping Ukraine so that you can concentrate on China. But if the Russians prevail in Europe, your problems with China and Taiwan will be much greater. The best way you can actually help yourselves in China and Taiwan is to push the Russians back so they're not so assertive, they're not such a good ally of China. And for the sake of 5% of your defence budget, you could achieve a historic, not victory, but a historic dominance over a resurgent Russia. It doesn't mean to say you beat Russia, but you put them back in their box for a generation for 5% of your defence budget. During the Cold War, the Americans would have taken that any day of the week because they were spending most of their defence budget on worrying about the Russians. Now you could deal with them with 5%. So yes, the Americans have immense capacity, but they don't choose to use it because America is going into an isolationist phase. They're embracing isolationism with a will now, and the world is going to have to live with that.
And dare we say, some of the voices that make some of the geopolitical decisions don't have perhaps the same level of insight and wisdom as previous generations might have done in the White House.
You may say that, Gareth. I couldn't possibly comment. Yeah, of course, they're naive. They're completely naive. And I mean, I've never. The Trump White House is as lacking in expertise in world politics as I can ever remember. That doesn't mean to say it will always be like that. They might change the team around. They might get good at it after 18 months. But it's been chaotic. And American diplomacy on everything, on Gaza, even on Sudan, even where they've done the right thing, as they've tried to do in Sudan, is chaotic, just chaotic. And at the moment, there's a real battle going on in the White House over Ukraine between Rubio, who is more sympathetic to Ukraine in European positions, and J.D. Vance, the vice president. And Dan Driscoll, the man who's in Abu Dhabi, is J.D. Vance's old friend. And there's Dan Driscoll now. He's in the forefront of these negotiations in Abu Dhabi. There he is, he's a young guy. He has a little bit of military experience. He was a lieutenant for 4 years. Otherwise, he's an investment banker. And he's up against Russian hard-bitten professionals discussing the security of Europe for the future, not just Ukraine, but European security. So, yeah, I mean, the United States is in an amateur phase dealing with the biggest issues in world politics that have arisen for a generation.
Needless to say, if they were here, they'd say something slightly different.
They would.
Michael, good to see you. Thank you so much.